have my heart set on a new electric bike. My son got a hay bike. I love that thing.
They're fun to ride, aren't
It is. And it looks pretty slick. And you can't steal the battery because it's integrated and it's got a lock.
they? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's got like a wide down tube, like what you get on the carbon bikes,
Mm-hmm.
but that's where the battery goes. And then when you close it and lock it, all you see is the hay bike logo.
Oh, that's cool.
Really slick.
Yeah, super cool.
And then you've got
How are you?
his only problem is.
Right here too?
Basically,
Basically, we both get the time that one car.
Yeah, those things are awfully heavy to get on one bike rack, aren't they?
It's not so much that, as they have limited.
Yeah. That's my battery.
Oh,
Yeah.
I really got back
You
into
can't
it.
take it on. like,
That did nice and
corridor.
separate.
interesting.
He's underneath.
I will say that,
I would imagine so.
route
That's
to
awfully
this building in my house is not awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to, like, I came in.
I understand the precaution.
I mean, I make up like Pioneer and then.
He did it right.
That's
Turn it a little.
That's sort of like, I think that's slightly worse, or I'm on gum,
Oh,
and so I go gum to,
my,
like, East is not a very great road. Pioneer has a bike lane,
converted.
Yeah.
so, but East doesn't, it's kind of sticky. But,
I can't remember
it's
the
wide,
name of
it's 2 lanes, and just
the
open.
motor.
Yeah,
So you take half lane, we'll go around, and
It's
it's
just the motor.
slow
that you
traffic
can
too,
attach
even
to.
at night,
Yeah, so it's kind of on Amazon,
So,
on Amazon.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
There are.
Hello.
Yeah.
Not.
Yeah, try to
Very-
go back, I'll probably take myself more time, so I think I'll try to go across, like, you can go to North Street and then down, I'm gonna go through downtown.
I guess.
Well, if I want to take the
Yeah,
center
right.
99 back to
Yeah.
Davis.
All the way to,
Among other things.
Among other things, but that's the big one, for sure.
Hi, how are you?
I watched the recording of the last meeting and I was happy to hear that. Funding.
Hello, how are
Staff-
you?
the same
How are you?
staff.
Oh, we did get
You weren't
money
here
from
last
COG, but the big
time.
money
You
that
had
we need
some
to
kind of trip
actually fund the project we did not pass.
Oh.
Oh, you had another obligation.
So it just raises a lot of questions because we have to spend our funding money by the summer.
Yeah.
I've been
But
all
we don't
over
have
the
enough
place.
money to actually
I
build
was
it.
in DC and
So we might, or like potentially risk
cool.
losing that federal money that way now because it would get.
And then I'll be in
So, and it's
DC
just
in
like,
like
and the
2
EIR was
weeks.
supposed to be last week, but now that's been delayed.
For lobbying, like for asking.
A lot.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm sure
This
Mr.
is a
Hirsch
summer
comes tonight, we'll be hearing.
so I'm
cool.
There's also been
delivering
a lot
a
about that.
session on.
So it's just kind of taken over my life.
I see, I
Yeah.
see. Well, there's quite a project.
Imagining the.
It is quite a project and it's nothing this big gets done.
So,
So,
doing that,
it's pretty complicated.
it is.
Yeah.
Like
How are you
I
doing?
teach.
Good, started this the last meeting, especially when they're every other month, so.
Friday really up.
Feeling a lot of
On the loop.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
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 But also with like the new job, it's a year now, but,
Still, a year is still pretty good.
yeah,
And the new baby is also about a year.
just over a year.
Yeah.
He was like 5 weeks old when we were in DC.
There's a lot of, yeah. a lot
Yeah,
of
he's
ways
got,
to go
he's,
about it.
Kind of a.
he keep you busy at that age. you know.
Taking it
The
forward,
two of them are
start with
keeping us
our,
very
with
busy.
the neuroscience about human beings and
Nice,
we're
We're good, but it's like, yeah,
And
it's
while
just
we're doing
working
that,
here
here's some
And then
planning tools.
they're fine, the kids are at an age where I can like. start to,
Actually, you
like,
probably know this, but I was learning that
pay
this
attention
bias
to the
training
things that we're on.
has had mixed results, right? Like,
Following.
that's what I understand, but even though it seems like it's like.
Yeah, evidence not
It works
for my
better
job.
when approach
Yeah.
people don't
Right.
understand.
Well, yeah, no, I know. I'm
So-
just like, you're
So,
here.
if you
have,
just get
like,
into
I'm so
training,
impressed. I feel
figure
like
out
I have
how
one
long
kid.
it will
And
take.
it's starting to get a lot shittier now. And like, I feel like when he was
Actually,
under
you're in neuroscience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I
you're-
just did not have time for anything other than work.
Yeah.
And
You have two.
You're
Yeah.
only one that you pay attention to,
3.5.
which is doing about 2% of what you do.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's only
And
because
then you have this other
I
system.
have my partner
This other
understands, you
system
know, and
basically
she's like,
just sorts things into.
Does she work on her?
yeah,
It's a good and
she
bad,
does a
yeah.
very demanding
Well,
job too.
it's
She
just-
works
it's
for
just
a
two
very
files,
psychedelic company.
And the
Yeah.
files you need to.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't
We're trying
realize.
to
Oh.
attitude
Yeah, so
Ah.
You guys are powerful.
Probably.
Well, we have full schedules, that's for sure.
One of the problems is you
So if this
literally
and I
have no
volunteer
way
to
to
the
predict
nonprofit that I've been on
everything.
board for a few years.
Yeah.
It's called
Human
CNMD.
being is a
We do
machine, not a
skateboard
mean for
clinics.
getting.
You told me about this before.
Yeah.
So in order for the.
If those commitments didn't predate children,
Do it all the time.
Yeah.
You have to know what your biases are.
Yeah.
And consciously, rarely, or.
I finally,
And
I
then
finally
you have to see
visited
enough
defeat
down
and
for
left this
that
transport.
oh, yeah.
Which I was just kind of like, had been sort of holding on, and then now I like, it's like the meeting times, like with my childcare schedule, and like,
It
I
is
was only able
interesting,
to attend for an hour of board
real
meetings,
progress.
and,
Well, I just see real
yeah, and I just was not getting.
conversations that I'm in the room having with
There's like
like all
there's
kinds
like
of states and organizations.
like
and
I got
development around
or
the country.
something where it's like,
20 years ago, you couldn't have that.
I mean, you're there, but are you, you know?
Couldn't
And
sit
then eventually
there
you're
and
like,
get
alright,
to
well,
any
I'm just like in a seat. That's not-
agreed frame of
And some of it also has to do with things that just like to work, right?
Yeah.
Or you
But,
could
you
think
know,
about
like, I feel like if it's like activating a different part of your brain, it doesn't just feel like another like specific thing, you know? I feel like maybe like a more.
Now, I don't think anybody does,
Or like,
Keep my
something,
husband.
you know, food or something would be like very different, you know? Maybe that's
So
how
that's an example where
air and
where
transportation,
they,
there's
the
a lot
nurses
of.
association actually.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I got on this committee, it was like,
Training,
it was like a dual purpose, you know, it's like, this is like.
for years and.
Care about transit in my community, also.
Folks in transit.
It was more like I really wanted to do it and it worked.
This idea that you're just
You know,
gonna
there was
train
like overlap, you know?
everything's done. That doesn't
Yeah,
Yeah.
At all.
now it's just a labor of love.
I used to
because
do,
the
there
work
was
I
a,
do
I was on a committee,
Not-
that was like,
I mean, in the
that's
sense
actually
that,
about
like,
training, I wish we had.
And we have a zero carbon emission
But
and
the
everything
things that the university
tied
offers
into
are
that
just
now, transportation.
inadequate, like they, like
But
we
you're-
tried to get
you're
one that
sitting
was
here
tailored to our work, right, like we wanted.
No,
rather than
I'm
having
in
to take it off
community
the shelf,
engagement work.
yeah,
Oh,
everyone
Yeah.
kind of stumbles and
It's
does
still
it,
very
doesn't really
community
get a lot out of it.
oriented, which is
You
great,
got
but
really
it's
nice,
less
asked them to do
specific.
one that was like tailored towards the transportation
So
field.
it's kind of broadly
And
looking.
looking specifically at our issues, with
Yeah,
our
I.
needs, our.
Yeah, and it's working with
Yeah.
all kinds of different community groups rather than just like that one side of the world. Right, like the air district, another air quality, and then also tobacco, home health, stuff, like public health stuff.
Right. So those are-
Girls, but yeah, it's much.
So I've always customized them.
Yeah.
and I always
Yeah,
did
well,
them.
and my work with SMUD already taken me to Salone County, Yolo County. So
Yeah.
only serves.
I think it's also just like
I was
even
gonna
an
say,
hour long or 90 minutes,
It's
that's
kind of like a really regional.
you have 9 weeks, right, it was just not
It's all
enough to cover, right, like you weren't, you weren't addressing all the issues, right, like there's issues, we have, you know, people with wheelchairs.
We just
in
had
our
a meeting,
midst.
coordinating with them.
And they felt like the original curriculum we felt
Eliminating.
accommodate
Because
there.
I don't know a lot about that world.
And it was
but
like,
yeah,
this was 90 minutes, like,
And,
what can you do, you know,
we're having to figure out.
and
what
that, but that
some of
isn't
these
enough,
are.
right, like, and we tried to make the case that we
Seems like
need
there's
more than
actually
one a year, but the potential, everyone's just businesses and
Exciting for
doesn't
people.
allow it, it's not all out.
Us having
Yeah, I do.
solar, battery
my
solar,
introduction
our buses can
class.
essentially be sort of
I
like
do a new director class.
mobile backup battery, like sources in case of
Yeah.
a grid failure.
I think actually there was a longer version, but everyone chose the short one. And
We're just talking about,
to our dismay.
Valley
And I
cleanup.
don't know, I always start mine with.
Analysis fund. Have you guys
Oh,
had it?
Yeah, the last meeting.
Okay, I can't remember if you were, yeah,
The last meeting I.
the last meeting you attended. Which was like, for you were fairly new.
I think that was my
Yeah.
first meeting, actually. Went over the early part, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally, yeah, and then also
Yeah,
just, it's so complex because.
Well, I'm glad you do that,
percentage
because,
of our
from what I
team
understand
funding
about
are
PPG, like, I've looked into it so
And now
many
we have
times.
so many
but,
different
like,
diverse experiences, right, like different levels and.
so much information
That's
is
the
available all
issue
the
about
time, and it's like
culture.
more and more. So I have like, and I looked
They
at,
come
like,
at
I've read about like what like CCAs are like so many times, and still don't have this like
But you also have.
aspirational.
I feel the same way, I'm really glad you didn't say that.
Yes.
But anybody
yes,
with
those are
water,
all-
because
those are all that stuff.
Anybody? What's that,
Any water?
Steven, water? anyone?
I've got
I
one,
have some,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Everybody came well equipped, Heather?
Sure.
Thanks for sending that to me, Heather, I appreciate it.
Everybody else is good?
Thank you.
Did not have this last time.
So, I'm not really happy with looking at myself. I'm trying to like give it side by side.
Hey, Stephen, are you trying back to take a second?
I am,
I gotta run.
of course.
That'd be great. I broke my bike this morning.
Broke it?
Road,
Oh, road.
yeah.
It's 90, I don't know why you did it.
Honestly, it's more just the safety
Yeah.
thing, you know, I was kind of thinking about it as the days one, I'm like, hey, that's not a good idea. I mean, I know that like others feel perfectly safe, but I think I've gotten more risk averse since becoming a mom. I can say. You know what I
Well,
mean?
you have to have really good lights. I have some really good lights.
I
Yeah,
get
the ones on
really
my wheels
risk
was
averse
really
at
good, yeah.
sunset, which is most likely where it's going to be.
Exactly, that's what I was
You're
thinking.
completely invisible
Right.
with that sun in your eyes.
I think you get that glare, and you're riding into the sun, you get that glare.
So I used to have to leave Yolo housing, and in the winter it never mattered, because if you're leaving at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, it's pitch black anyway.
Right, right.
But in the summer, when you're leaving at 7:30, 8 o'clock, it's like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
terrible time. And the cars can't even see each other, let alone the added variable of the bicycle.
Not to
It's
mention,
really
sometimes you get
frightening.
those Delta breeze headwinds.
Yeah.
Did
Little extra.
Little fun.
you guys both bike today?
I mean, I live a mile away.
Yeah.
Right, right,
Yeah.
so you bike tonight.
I use my electric car.
What's up?
I use my electric car.
Awesome.
Winter's is far away.
Yeah, that's car, yeah, that would be a fantasy bike.
Well, Madam Chair, it is 5:59.
I'm just gonna behave myself and wait till 6.
Yeah, we should remove it.
Autumn, do you know, what one's coming from?
I don't know, that's a good question. Do we know, did Olin RSVP?
I did not receive an RSVP.
Did everyone see, Heather did make some revisions. Thank you for the good catches on the notes. So the revised version is here. I don't think we nailed it out because we thought it was too late, but we wanted to provide it, so. Yeah, look at it.
Like a last minute, no, we got card. Yay, all right, everybody ready? All ready to order. Good evening, this is the Citizen Advisory Committee meeting for Yolo Transit District for June 27th, 2023. And let's see, can we get a roll call?
Yolo County? City of Woodland? City of West Sacramento?
Present.
City of Winters?
Present.
City of Davis?
Here.
Director at large?
Here.
Very much. This is the time for items from the public regarding matters that are not on the agenda this evening, but are within the purview of Yolo Transit District. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes per person, and please identify yourself in the community in which you live before providing your comments. And do we have any from the folks in the room? Seeing none, do we have any online?
We do not.
Point of order, if I may, Madam Director, we received a public comment. Is that for the time of the director's report, or would that be not agendized for this evening?
That would not be agendized for this evening. I want to make sure, are the mics working? Do you have your mic on? I'm not hearing.
Mic's on.
I think it's working.
Test.
Okay. Is yours on? Okay, I wasn't hearing it. If anyone is watching at home, which I don't know they are, then they need that for the sound.
So how would you like to have that entered into the record?
The way we normally do it is just by, we distribute it to the board in advance, or the committee in this case, in advance, and by that means it is entered into the record. But if there's any, and I think because it's not agendized, I don't think you're speaking about it, although you could certainly direct staff to put it on the agenda for the next meeting, if you will.
I simply want to acknowledge it for the minutes that we received a item that was not on an agenda from Alan Hirsch regarding the I-80 corridor, and we should have that in the record. Seeing no other public comments, and we move on to approval of the minutes. And I want to also take a moment right now to thank my illustrious co-chair for mentioning. I Super appreciate it.
Just a comment, I think, as we're getting new members and for those who have the acronyms, it might be helpful to create a glossary of those. I remember CEB was zero emission bus, but if I see STA, you know what, because you work with them all the time. And just for the sake of the minutes, since Andrew and I are familiar with the bicycle transportation and street safety committee, it's a long acronym. So anyway, that's just something you can consider as we're having people to help those of us who don't work with all those acronyms all the time.
That's just a suggestion for the future.
Yeah, for the future.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any corrections to the minutes? If not, do we have a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve
So Madam Chair, I would just suggest that you make a motion to approve the minutes as amended,
as amended.
not the ones that are included in the packet, just to clarify for the record.
Okay, thank you very much.
That showed that you were here.
Detained. Do you want to amend your motion?
Yeah, I will amend the motion to say that we make a motion, we approve the minutes as amended.
Great, do you have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. And we're gonna move into the administrative reports. Madam Director.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Would you like me to give the Executive Director's report first, or should we take the CAC member reports?
We'll go to the CAC report. So do we have updates from anyone?
I make a comment just about the presentation made at the Davis City Council May 6th about I-80 widening, and there was 21 people that spoke against. But you were calm and had some good responses, and so good for you to sort that through.
Thank you.
I think it's and I've contacted Donna Neville and said I'm grateful that you were on the council for that meeting. Otherwise, that third vote wouldn't have proceeded. The mayor, Will Arnold, had abstained because he works for Caltrans, and then had one no vote proceed with it, 3 letters or 3 motions or letters of recommendation.
Thank you for that update. Any other updates from Andrew?
So Davis Bicycling Transportation and Street Safety Commission, at our meeting our meeting with the last couple of months, there also has been a lot of spirited discussion about the I-80 project. I also work for Caltrans, so I, like the mayor, had to recuse myself from our recommendations on the letters. But a lot of spirited discussion there, also more discussion on, there's still continued discussion about like modifications to the parking on G Street in Davis, following the decision to make that a permanent open street. There was a proposal, like some of the businesses were still pushing to find ways to get more parking in, but there's still, of course, that would have impacts on the biking and walking environment there and around downtown Davis. The next BTSSC meeting, it's July, I know it's Thursday, I want to say it's July, July 13th, 6 p.m. and those are at the Davis Senior Center.
Yes.
My comment is a question also for Andy and for everyone. I heard that that the bike share is coming back to Davis in the fall. Do we have any updates on that? And do we know how that relates to the rest of Yolo County approaching bike share? I'd just love to know if that conversation is advancing outside of Davis.
I think I think you probably know as much as I do, but I've just heard updates. But I think that's going to be on the BTSSC's calendar, like in July, so we'll get more. I think it's, one of the months, I forget which month exactly, but it's one of the months coming up. That'll be on our calendar, so we'll be learning more then. But yeah, I'm not too privy to. I know I've heard the same thing you have, but I'm not too privy to exactly where things are at.
Okay.
And from my perspective, I haven't heard anything about kind of expanding that countywide. And that's the first time that I've heard that it would be this fall. The last I heard is they were just putting the RFP out, so I would be very surprised if it was rolling out that quickly, but I could very well be wrong, but that's the first I've heard that date.
Yeah, I heard that from a researcher, so it's not a credible source necessarily, but, you know, she didn't lie, it was just, she may be misinformed.
Thank you. Seeing no other update reports, I think we'll have the director's report.
Okay, great. Well, a few things going on, which obviously some of you have heard about. There's been a lot of discussion lately about the YoloTD project. And we did present to both the Davis City Council and the BT Bicycle Transportation and Street Safety Committee earlier this month. Some major kind of right around the same time, in fact, as I was getting ready for the presentation to the BTSSC, I found out that the California Transportation Commission staff, like literally as I was walking in the door, that the CTC staff were not recommending our project for $100 million in funding, which is necessary to build the first segment of the project. What that means is we have an $86 million federal grant, our infra grant, that under the program, under the law that created that program, those funds need to be expended by next September, which means they need to be obligated. In other words, we have to be ready to go to construction by next September. Without the CTC funding, we do not at this time have a project that we can actually fund. So the fact that we did not award those funds, we have a lot of work to do to figure out what the path forward is. I have spoken with the director of District 3, and I've also spoken with folks at headquarters. There've been a number of conversations with Caltrans over the last few days to talk about what that path forward looks like. Right now, we're very focused on seeing if there are other sources of funding that we could still go after and win, or at least get committed prior to that deadline for the federal funds to be expended. At the same time, we're also looking at the draft environmental impact report, which has been delayed. It was originally meant to be out in January. The latest date that we had was it was going to be out the end of this week. That has now been delayed as well due to kind of questions and conversation back and forth between Caltrans headquarters and District 3. So a lot of delays, a lot of questions about how to kind of find the path forward for this project over the next few months. So a lot of more questions than answers at this point, which is why we had originally planned on having an update for you tonight until some of these unexpected things have happened. And so we don't yet have a new date for when the EIR is going to be released. It's, as we understand, internal conversations between headquarters and Caltrans, and District 3. So hope to have more information and we'll be able to have more substantive discussion, but right now that EIR, the draft EIR, is still internal and confidential, and it really limits our ability to have substantive conversation about the project because we can't share anything, unfortunately. Yeah, go ahead.
So what was the basis for the rejection?
So we did meet with CTC staff to try to understand what some of the concerns were. There's been a lot of publicity about this idea that Caltrans ranked this 24 of 24 projects, that it was their lowest priority. But in fact, there was many applications and only 24 were listed as a priority. And those were statewide. So ours was one of the 24 prioritized projects for Caltrans, not their lowest priority. And in fact, it was the #1 priority for District 3 and the #1 priority for SACOG. In terms of the reasons that we got, it was a big ask. We were asking for a large amount of a relatively small pot of money. Most of the projects that were awarded were in the $5 to $10 to $15 to $20 million range. Ours was a $100 million ask, so it was a big chunk of a statewide pot. We also heard that there was Caltrans had suggested that we go for the trade corridor enhancement program, which is very focused on freight corridors. CTC staff thought that it would be a better fit for a different program, the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. So, some feedback along those lines as well. We were, I will say, of the projects that didn't get funded, we were 5th. They were ranked in order of those that got funded. So we were the 5th from the top as far as projects that didn't get funded. So we were by no means at the bottom of the list. But it, like all of these grant programs, these are, highly competitive. Yeah, so that's what I've been told.
Sorry, quick follow-up question. Sure.
Sure.
I guess how to phrase this, is the fact that it was a widening, a part of the reason? Was there other widening projects that also didn't advance? Is that part of a state policy that is?
In fact, the two projects in the SACOG region that did get funding were both widenings, I-5 and the Southeast Connector.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
Are there other questions from the board?
Just out of curiosity, how much did the Southeast, I hadn't seen that about the Southeast Connector being a project that got funded. How much did it get?
Not very much, $3 million for planning money, and then the I-5 managed lanes got 10 million also for planning. But those are both highway widening projects, yeah. I do have other updates. I'm happy to answer more questions about I-80.
Well, I want to make sure that also that we're seeing if anybody in the online has questions. So,
Okay, great.
maybe go through the report and then we'll see.
Okay, a couple of things, stepping away from the Interstate 80 project. At the last board meeting earlier this month, the board did approve the final service plan for Woodland, and they did approve the alternative that this committee had recommended. So that's great news. And we're on track right now with a September. Do we have a date? September 1? This September. We're expecting vehicle delivery this month, and the critical path issue, although we're feeling pretty good about it right now, is making sure we have sufficient drivers to launch the service. The board also adopted updates to the fare policy and microtransit policies overall to be kind of consistent with RideCo, the new application. So soft launch of the RideCo app in August, in Nights Landing and Winters. With then the rollout, in Woodland in September. So we're really excited that is all kind of everything is approved, and now we're just very focused on getting it implemented. And Courtney and Daisy have been spending a lot of time on that. One of the projects, now that we've kind of a lot of that planning work is done, Courtney, one of the things he's going to be working on is our paratransit policies and rider information. And I know that's something that's been a priority for this committee. So we're just starting to scope that project right now. And looking forward to bringing that back to you. As I know, it's something that you've been asking for some time. And then lastly, the other thing we're working on right now that we're going to be bringing to the board, which was not ready to bring to you tonight, is an update to our 12-month goals. So these were adopted last November, and this committee did have some input into those goals for the year. So we're going to be giving a progress report to the board in July on our progress to date on achieving those goals. And any updates going forward. So keep an eye out for that. So that's my report.
Thank you very much. Any questions for other parts of the report? Any comments from the board members or committee members? Good. Anyone from the public who wishes to comment? Seeing none, thank you very much for that. We want to go over the long-range calendar.
Sure, we can pull up that slide, and I will just say this was not updated. You can see it's very bare bones, and part of that is because we are doing our work plan updates right now. And so I apologize that this looks like not very much, but we wanted to, again, apologies. And if there are items that you would like to see, please flag them for us. I think almost certainly we will have an agendized item on the Yolo 80 managed lanes at the next meeting. I would be very surprised if we didn't. And I would also say, I think the capital improvement plan and the paratransit items and the fare structure, I think all of those this is based on our original schedule that we thought we had for those. And I'd say that none of those are actually going to be ready in September. So I do apologize.
Yeah, so maybe just updating the calendar or to get to a more, in line with the goals that you're working on to get to kind of a more realistic timeframe would be great. With that, seeing nothing else, does anybody have anything they wanted to see added to the long-range calendar?
I have a question about sort of the fare structure discussion. Does that include, or I guess, are you prepared to speak at all about it at all? Is it too early stages or?
Yeah, honestly, we have not started working on it other than the microtransit fares, which of course we've been working on for the last couple of months, but we have not started working on this at all.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, well, I'm just, there's just so much good research that I can direct you to about the need for open loop payments, and transitioning to that system and moving away from the Connect card, and towards open loop payments. So I just want to suggest that in the early stages, you connect to researchers at UC Davis who are working on this, and also the Cal IT. So I think,
Absolutely, thank you.
I'll just share a personal experience. I didn't pay for my Yolo bus twice last month because it took 2 days for, the money to go through on your Connect card. And it's just like, I'm not saying that this, the money that you've lost is such a travesty, but, scaling that, I don't know what it looks like, right? We don't know. And the bus drivers do just let you on. But I feel bad, I just don't really carry cash. So I think it's really important that we move that way.
And I'll just add, thank you for that. We did, as part of a TRISIP grant that the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority led, that included funding for all of the transit agencies in the SACOG region to get contactless payment readers. And so that effort was funded, and that's now moving ahead. And so we're a part of that group, and we're in line, if you will. And I'm not sure, Chad Makula, our IT director, is the lead on that, and he's not here tonight. So, but that is something that we can certainly bring you a report on at a subsequent meeting if you'd like.
I just follow up on that. So I have as most folks know, I have a non-neurotypical son, and he doesn't really handle cash. So systems that are cashless are much easier for him to manage. And I realize that when we're talking about disabled riders, there's a very great range, but it does sort of even the playing field for non-neurotypical riders. So, thank you. Let's talk about Woodland Transit Center.
I'm sorry, can I actually ask a couple of questions before I move on? Related to this. So I apologize for having missed the last meeting, and I was curious if there was an update. Has staffing recovered? I know that job was a big push for a long time.
Yeah, so the good news is that we are currently recruiting right now for a director of finance. Our current director of finance, Leo, was always an interim. And he came on board as a consultant to kind of help us restructure our financial systems and our budget. And so he's now ready to really retire. And so we have the application, we have 9 candidates right now. We're setting up interviews with 3 that are very strong. So we feel good about that. And then, so that's our only open position at the moment. So we're in pretty good shape. We do have the budget that the board just approved last month. That's the other thing that happened, I should say. The board approved the budget last month. Kind of a big deal. Does include a couple of additional positions, but we're not implementing those right away. One of them is actually an additional person on the finance team, and we want to have our new director of finance in place before we add that position. And then another position on the planning team, which is a new position funded by the SACOG grant that we got for the Yolo managed lanes.
And then drivers are hired.
Oh, yes, of course, driver recruitment. Yes, I haven't looked at that. There was a meeting today and I wasn't in the meeting. Did you get an update today?
Yeah. So we've been working with Transdev next door to kind of push them pretty hard. So right now we're at 58, but we have 12 in training. We expect them to be finished by middle of July. And so that'll push us up to about 70. And we're looking to get back to pre-COVID levels of at least 82 drivers before we start to implement some of the service that was cut previously. So based on how Transdev's looking, we look like we could probably closer to the end of the year recover our driver shortage.
And I'll just say our ratio of trainees to people who actually end up in service it's not great. It's not going to be 100%, I would say, based on prior experience, but hopefully it'll be high. And they've made some changes in terms of it's gotten better lately, I'll put it that way. So we're hopeful that at least a big chunk of those 12 will actually translate into long-term drivers for us.
Thank you. And then my other question, I know we're going to talk about bylaw amendments or revised criteria for CAC representation and recruitment. But if we're going to have a recruitment conversation, could we put that on the long-range calendar to talk about recruitment for the CAC at further meeting?
Yeah.
Thank you. Those were my questions. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now we'll move on to the transit center. Oh,
I have, yeah, sure. Sorry, I had a follow-up question on the services being restored. So I know I'd seen in the budget, like it's funded to have the 42 go to every 30 minutes all the time, which is awesome news. So I'm curious, I mean, just with the, as the driver situation improves, is there any projected timeline for when that might happen, as well as any other service restorations or expansions that will be going on?
The budget gives us, assumes those start in January of 2024. So that's, but I would say it's an aggressive timeline, but it gives us the flexibility to do that because we have the funding starting then, based on what was approved in the budget. But I don't think that we're ready to kind of commit to that date for any of those, again, based on drivers and also the changes for the 42. That's both going to 30-minute headways, but also we're about to have a presentation on the Downtown Woodland Transit Center. We also want to make some changes, right, to the route of that. Also thinking about where we start and end trips. We still have this issue with long layovers, right? And also, we broke some of our transfers in Woodland and West Sac when we changed the 42. So there's some other kind of overhauls, if you will, to the 42 that it's just so important to get right. We went ahead with the old schedule, with the schedule that we launched last fall, because we felt it was important to, roll out the 30-minute peak service, but we knew that there was some issues and we talked about that with this committee. So I think we really want to get it right with this next schedule change for the 42. And so part of it will be when do we know where the new Downtown Woodland Transit Center is going to be? We don't think we need to wait for that center to be fully built out, but we at least need to be ready to actually start running buses there, and depending on what level of infrastructure improvement is needed for that to happen. So that's where some of the uncertainty comes in with regard to the timing of the 42 changes, because we don't really want to have to change it and then change it again a few months later or a few months later. So we really want to make sure the next change is one that is going to kind of endure for a while.
Sounds great.
okay, sounds like a good segue. So let's segue.
All
Hey, Heather, could you get that thing off the screen? I don't know if it's possible, or, sorry. The malware. Thank you, sorry, Courtney.
No, it's all good. Okay, so today I'm here to present to you guys kind of the update for the Woodland Transit Center study. This project has been going on since a little bit before I got here, but we'll go to the next slide and I'll provide you guys with kind of a historical background. What is a transit center? And then kind of where are we at today? And so I'm just kind of starting with what is a transit center. Usually it's defined as kind of the hub for transit agencies when we're moving people. And the key components of this include really it's surrounded by a major trip generator. It connects all of our routes, and it's a place where it offers also, in addition to bus service, other modes that can also kind of link up to provide this centralized area for passengers to onboard and offboard. And so go to the next slide. So currently, this is kind of an overview on satellite of where the existing Woodland Transit Center is. That red dot area is the point. Sorry, I can't really zoom in for folks if they're watching, but that kind of gives you the background of where we're at currently, what are we working with, and we'll go to the next slide.
You can actually, there is a Zoom.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, so now we can kind of see here, this is the overview. The areas that are shaded out in green with the lines kind of indicate abandoned zones. So the God Shocks, the movie theater, and basically that area right south of the Walmart are boarded up buildings that have a little bit of homelessness and some other issues, as well as the kind of the infrastructure not being upkept. And we'll go to the next slide. And so with the current status, these pictures were taken about a month ago. Like I said, most of the stores are vacant. There's really not good lighting at night. We've heard complaints from a lot of our riders and passengers about not feeling safe. And then the surrounding area is just not really well maintained. So we'll go to the next slide. I think I might have a, okay. And so, yeah, I kind of talked about this earlier. Safety concerns, minimal passenger amenities for those that are waiting. Again, with some of the issues with how our current service operates, the routes don't sync up on time. And so with that, passengers often have to kind of wait there, and all they can really go to is Walmart. And so that's really not kind of an amenity that attracts more choice riders or just riders in general that currently use our service. Also, again, the lack of kind of quality active transportation access makes it a little bit difficult. Go to the next slide. Again, these are just more pictures that were taken about a month ago, highlighting the just tree stumps that are blocking off exits, which I believe are for homeless, and then unkept grass, just again to highlight kind of the status of the transit center and surrounding area. Go to the next slide. And so to date, just to give you the historical background, so in 2018, there was an initial study with Kinleyhorn that was conducted, and the original scope of that was for an off-street transit center. Really, the key difference in that is this would be a larger facility where the buses would pull in. And with that, that report was completed in 2019, but that was never finalized, and that kind of led into COVID, which kind of suspended the future implementation of that. We'll go to the next slide. So currently, from 2019 to today, there was a new proposal that was drafted with Kinleyhorn that changed the scope slightly, going from an off-street transit center to an on-street transit center. Part of this decision was to help us respond to the feedback of the community to be able to move our buses to an identified location quicker than the time it would take to identify land, gather enough funds, and then build the facility for an off-street center. So those are some of the key differences of why we're choosing for going on-street as opposed to off-street. And within this scope, we're going to make sure that Kinleyhorn gives us kind of 3 ultimate options, and then a rough 10% design of what improvements would need to be made to this site. And we'll go to the next slide. Here's just a kind of a timeline of like where we at and kind of what we're working on and the cost of the contract itself. This was started back in April, and currently we're in May. So we're working with Kinleyhorn right now, still getting to the point of having determining options that would be suitable. We're also working with the City of Woodland staff as well, just to make sure that they're involved and that we're responsive to their feedback that they have. And maybe one more slide, and that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions or comments from members?
Yeah, I have a couple questions if I can. I like the idea of, getting different options, and I know that this is, there's kind of an existing plan that was done a few years ago, right? Is that being built on or improved upon?
So I would say that it partially is, in the sense that what the existing plan had were areas that were closer within the downtown corridor. And so we're using that kind of same scope and purpose, but the difference is that this is on street, so we're not able to use all the exact components from that prior scope. But the idea of having really more of a centralized focus within the transit center for Woodland is something that we've kept.
So just to put a finer point on it, that study identified vacant parcels that we could actually purchase and then basically develop. But because we're looking at doing something in the public right away, that's the change in focus. But a lot of the background work in terms of, kind of identifying general corridors that are good for bus movement, et cetera, is, we're able to leverage.
So then, follow-up question.
Sure.
Okay, so then, I guess the 2 things that I would be curious about is like, could you explain kind of the difference between on-street and off-street for us? And then why, how is 10% chosen? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so the key difference in on-street versus off-street is really the size of the facility, and then the access of how buses are basically getting to the transit center and exiting. So a good example would be West Sacramento on-street. So when you're getting on West Cap and then on Berkeley, the bus is really just driving up and then pulling out. They're not going into a facility or destination. So usually the difference is it's less capital intensive than building out a major transit facility where the buses are pulling in. It's just, you kind of have, like Bob was saying, some public right of way, some nice amenities, shelters, waypoint signage, and then your buses are able to pull in the next. And then as for the 10%,
Okay.
I think for the purpose of that, it's just the kind of that will match the prior scope in terms of the build for it. But we plan to, if there are major capital expenses, we'll probably go out again to hire like an engineer to do the rest.
And I'll just jump in to add a few more things on that. I think one of the downsides of an off-street transit center particularly, well, is that, it's basically a big parking lot, right? And so then it has to be big enough where the buses can turn around inside. And so from an operations standpoint, like transit operators, we like that because it makes it easier, we have more control than when we're in the public right away where we're dealing with bikes and pedestrians and parked cars and whatnot. But it does, from a land use perspective, if you think about putting something in a downtown area, it kind of hollows out, it de-densifies, right? And so one of the key considerations, if we're looking at the city of Woodland's goals for their downtown, if we take empty parcels and use them for basically a big concrete pad for buses to turn around and stop, that's land that's not available for housing, for mixed use, for whatever the city's goals might be. And also I would say that for the volume of buses that we operate in Woodland, and this is another change, that we're now with microtransit and we've reduced the number of local routes, replace that with microtransit. We just don't have the volume of buses that normally you see with an off-street transit center. So from my perspective, I thought that an off-street center was kind of overbuilding it, if you will, given the level of service that we have in Woodland. The kinds of, when you think about off-street transit centers, like, the Transbay Terminal in San Francisco is the kind of thing that comes to mind, right? Where you just have literally dozens of buses from dozens of transit operators all arriving in a very dense area at the same time, where there's just not capacity in the streets to accommodate all of those. But that's not the issue here in Woodland.
I have a question. I think I'm just curious about like criteria for the site location. Like, you imagine I have to accommodate 2 buses or is it 3 buses? Like how large of a site are we looking at? And then what are other criteria you're using to decide? And is there a reason for our committee to have a feedback on that criteria?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So for the criteria for our scope, what we really wanted to make sure that in terms of our buses being able to get into the downtown corridor, so it's making sure that the street width is wide enough to actually accommodate turns, left and right turns for our buses. Also making sure for the public right of way that we had at least about 200 feet of curb length for our buses. And then from there, also we're seeing about what is the kind of the public flows of people travel behaviors within the corridor. So we're taking that information with Kinley-Horn, and then what they're doing is basically kind of gridding out the downtown corridor. And then within that criteria, they'll be able to kind of show us what are potential areas where buses could get in. And the number of buses we're looking at right now is 4. So it'd be the number of 4 buses being able to get into our preferred location based on that criteria. And then taking in feedback from Woodland City Council, Woodland City staff, because I know they were talking about, certain roads and how would they be able to handle buses and the frequency of travel. Also taking into consideration, how is it at night? Are these areas still safe, or there's still kind of bigger issues? So within that, we're kind of going to be comprehensively looking at the downtown area, assessing the road conditions, how our buses will be able to get in and out of the downtown corridor, our routes, and how we would actually will be efficient to route them in, and then Woodland City staff feedback as well.
I think you covered it. I think the only thing was, so we want room for 4 fixed route buses, which is, I think, the most we're ever really gonna have realistically, at least in the near term. Plus 1 parking space for 1 microtransit vehicle as well, right? Or loading space for a microtransit vehicle.
Yeah, potentially, but yeah, the big 4, for the 4 spaces for fixed route would be the key essential for space.
So I have some comments. So at one point they were looking at vacating the rail line as a way to accommodate kind of pull through without sort of off-streeting it. And I don't know if they've made any progress on that, but it would be interesting to get an update. I also think that this is an opportunity to think a little bit differently. So I know that some of the centers don't have really mindful design for folks who are disabled to accommodate a variety of disabilities, not just wheelchairs, or mobility issues, but also vision, hearing, and neurotypical. And something I'm seeing is kind of an emerging issue, because my son now has a e-bike, is that transportation is not accommodating e-bikes, and yet there's a big push to have people take up e-bikes, and if we're gonna do last mile connect, we're gonna have to figure out how to accommodate those. I guess my final thing is I see some places in other cities as well as Europe incorporating solar powered chargers for things like phones while people wait, wondering if you're thinking about those types of amenities.
Yeah. So, so in terms of the amenities, yes, we are looking at all those. We're looking at a larger bike storage facility that would be able to house e-bikes and regular bikes. Still, a lot of that is to be determined, like within where we're currently at within working with Kinleyhorn. But we do plan to at least have some nice amenities and features that accommodate, in addition to ADA features as well. So that, I think, in our next update, we'll be able to provide a bit more.
I definitely just want to make a plug for vision, hearing, and neuro, because what I see transportation folks focus on is mobility, but there are a lot of different kinds of riders. And I think it was Molly followed by Andrew.
Okay, my question was, follow up on, whether, I'm just curious, like, how much of like existing sidewalk space or right of way can be taken up, or is this available vehicle roadway that we're looking at as sort of options, or can you cut out a sidewalk and make space for it, or is that, because there are some pretty wide sidewalks in some spots. I just wondered what kind of creativity does the team have in terms of looking at downtown?
Yeah, so I would say we still have to be ADA compliant with the sidewalks. We can't just take it out.
Oh, sure.
But at that same time, it'll really depend on working with Kinleyhorn and city staff on what they feel is like a comfortable medium. So I can't say that we have an exact number of sidewalk we can take at this current time, but it's going to be kind of a balance depending on what we're able to work with the city and what they'll allow, and then kind of from there be able to make sure that the sidewalk is still ADA compliant.
Yeah.
And then from there we'll kind of be able to know kind of our golden number.
I would just add, yeah, we are looking at the width of the entire right of way and looking at modifications to that as well. One of the things we've talked about, I'm not sure if it's actually listed as a criteria or not, but that there is a lot of like public land, like that's owned by the county in particular, right, in downtown Woodland, that potentially could we even expand the public right of way back, if we're looking at sites that are really where the frontage is all owned by the county, right? So
Or by the housing authority.
Over the housing authority, yeah, other public entities that might be willing to give up some of their landscaping, if you will, to have, wider sidewalks, et cetera, bus shelters, features like bike parking, et cetera. So, we have asked the consultant to look at where, parcels that have public ownership, that would give us more flexibility potentially in terms of rather than having to negotiate with private landowners, right, about taking some of their private space for public right of way.
Thank you. So, my question kind of building on the discussion about like just infrastructure and amenities at the transit center. So I know at the West Sacramento Transit Center, I mean, that's a place where when there are facilities for the bus drivers, like to be able to use the restroom and when like have been facilities for breaks and whatnot. But I know that since Woodland is the place for, Woodland is like right now, for the 42, it's the start and end of the route. And obviously the transit center will play a key role in the remaining local fixed routes, and also could be a big layover spot for like micro transit drivers that are on break as well. So I'm curious what kind of facilities there will be for the drivers at the new transit center in terms of restrooms as well as other break type facilities.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We're definitely looking at making sure the drivers have access to restrooms. We don't think at this time they would necessarily be public restrooms, but more driver access restrooms. And then also seeing the surrounding areas where we could actually have our drivers go in to use the restroom within like the local area. Currently they go to Walmart within the Woodland Transit Center. So not ideal, but they still have that, and it is a bit of a walk. So yeah, those features are definitely within the scope, and we're making sure that once we have the preferred locations identified, then we can start to kind of phase out the rest of those amenities.
And then Stephen's after that. Can we circle back to the rail? And then also I noticed on your timeline, you don't have bringing anything to the CAC on here. So I am wondering if you are going to bring it back and ask for feedback. So maybe those two questions.
Yes, so we do apologize. That definitely needs to be updated. So you will be updated within, at our next meeting with the status of what we've received from Kimley-Horn, as well as feedback from Woodland City Council. And then we'll be able to provide you with a list of kind of the amenities and maybe a better breakdown of the criteria we're using to evaluate which site or what the process of going into selecting the site.
So yeah, we'll update the timeline, and make sure you have a draft that comes to you, ideally before it comes to the board, which I think, so you always have a meeting in September, board is in October. So we'll just have to look at the timeline and make sure we think about how the sequencing works. But on the rail yard site, sorry, Molly, yeah, that was one of the sites that was identified in the prior study. We're talking about the kind of where the empty rail cars are here on Main Street, just east of East Street. So, we haven't, the current scope, what we're looking at, because it's on street and not off street, excuse me, because it's on street, not
Right.
off street. And a lot of the feedback that we have is that, because our 42s really don't go downtown. The closest that they touch is the corner of East and Main in one direction, and then the Matmore and Main in the other direction. That a lot of the key destinations in Central Woodland are to the west of there. So we are looking at the kind of the boundary of sites that we're looking at is actually west of East Street. I believe it's east to College, is the area that we're looking at for that reason, just to get people closer to their destinations. And also because East Street is a very busy arterial, and like the corner of East and Main, it's just not a very pedestrian friendly environment. So for that reason, I'm not inclined to really pursue that site, although it is a site that has, needs something to happen with it. And there's a lot of questions about its future, but yeah.
Appreciate that. Stephen, and then Molly, do you want to go again?
Kimley-Horn, did they do any outreach to the business owners along the way so far, or will they be currently?
So they haven't done any outreach yet. Currently, what they've provided for us is like an overview of the downtown corridor, as Autumn was describing, between East and College. And then they pulled together some of the, basically the different streets and the different curves and left and rights that buses would be able to make within that corridor. But we haven't gotten to that point of actually doing that outreach of talking to the business owners, but we will.
You mentioned the West Sacramento Transit, which is like they circle around, they don't do U-turns or anything. Would the design in downtown Woodland be more like a two-way? You have something going both east and west, or would it be more similar to West Sacramento?
That's a good question. Right now, we're looking like it would just more kind of go in, loop, and go out, not a two-way.
Well, I mean, I don't think we know. It could be that we have bus stops on either side of the street, right? And like the westbound, buses are on one side and eastbound buses are on the other side, or it could be that they're all in a line like they are in West Sac. I don't think we actually have that yet.
No, right. Yeah, I was just saying. For the time being.
Yeah, so, I just keep listening so intently to what you're saying, and I'm getting what I previous stuff. But my question was about, whether in the survey that was done recently, this came up, and like, if that is involved, or did it not come up? Was this 12, was that survey, did that include any discussion of transit center-ness?
Which the
Wasn't
riders
there a
survey?
survey for the route?
No, so neither of those surveys included that, but this was still feedback while we were doing outreach of listening to our riders and what their kind of complaints and issues were as well. In addition to kind of, we already had plans to move from the transit center prior. So continuing that with the outreach that we had done separate, but still gathering that feedback. In addition to when we also spoke with Woodland City Council and kind of their, let's say, kind of support for us relocating as well from County Fremont, there has been a large amount of feedback we have collected that has supported us.
Inadvertent, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I'll feel like, yeah.
We haven't asked for it, but we get it all the time.
Any other questions, comments from members?
A quick comment, I just wanted to thank staff for the addition of the visual aids in the packet. I know that this is really helpful to get a visual on this as somebody who doesn't know the land of Woodland too well. So it's been helpful for this conversation tonight.
I appreciate getting the update on it, having been actually involved in the early conversations around it. You can know that it's still moving forward. Yeah. And I'm assuming at this point, this is just for information and you don't need any other feedback from us other than what you got on.
No, I mean, I think the feedback you've given us has been helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there's no specific action tonight.
Thank you so much. Were there any comments from anyone online? Thank you very much. So with that, I think we'll move on to the CAC bylaws.
Great, and I'll take this one. So go ahead to the next slide, Heather. So just by way of background, I think this is something that this group has had conversations over, I would say over the past 12 to 18 months, maybe. As part of, I think some of this initially came up during strategic planning in terms of coming up with what the CAC's vision is. There was talk about, how do we make sure that we have a CAC that's really representative of the communities that we serve? And in fact, our federal guidance is very much along those lines as well, that we need to make sure that we're really thinking about the kind of demographics of the community that we serve, the communities that we serve, and making sure that their voices are well represented. So following your recommendations to the board in February, they approved the creation of 3 additional at-large seats onto the CAC, and there was a number of other actions that you'll recall that they took at that time as well. But they also did create an ad hoc committee to basically look at the criteria that are in the bylaws for representation. And that committee, directors Jesse Lauren from Winters and Dante Early from West Sacramento were the 2 that volunteered to be on that committee, and took a little bit of time, but they did finally meet in June to look at that list and then come up with some revisions. And so if you go to the next slide. So there was kind of two major changes that they proposed. One is changes to the kind of the process itself by which we would fill vacancies. So focused on making sure that we're working with the board, member jurisdictions, and community-based organizations to advertise vacancies and recruit candidates. So really trying to cast a wider net, if you will, and then provide an application form. And that the CAC should include representatives with diverse backgrounds, interests, and life experiences. And then the following list of criteria. So then if you go to the next slide, that's where we kind of had a very long list, if you will, that had some kind of redundancies and some language that was, I think, kind of a bit unclear. We had local transit riders, intercommunity riders, and commuters traveling between, these cities, like all 3 different kinds of variants of transit riders, if you will. Anyway, and then also, so there was a bunch of combining, I would say, and consolidating of this list that happened. And then I think but not a lot of kind of new items were really added. I think it was kind of clarifying, consolidating, and sort of updating some of the language. So we've gone from 18 to 11. I do think, one thing that I think maybe was not on the list before was particularly prioritizing tribal representation. And also rural communities, because while the county does have a seat that they appoint, it's not explicit that it needs to be somebody who is rural or somebody that lives in a rural community, right? And so the ad hoc committee felt it was important to actually call that out. I don't know whether Winters counts as rural or not, but
it meets the definition, state and federal.
Right. But nonetheless, so that's and then the kind of parents category was expanded to include caregivers, kind of meaning people who care for others, not necessarily just children, and also the kind of the gender piece was expanded to include non-binary and also not just gender but also sexual orientation. So that's kind of a high level summary. Oh, and then finally, I think the bottom piece, the bottom number 11, individuals who work with or advocate on behalf of transit dependent or low income populations. So I think that's important to clarify that is there, as well as individuals themselves who are low income and transit dependent, right? So the committee felt it was important to have both. And And it's not necessarily to say that every single criteria on this list must be represented, but that this is the kind of, when we're advertising these vacancies, this is what we're looking for. And we do have, the 3 additional at-large seats as well as 1 vacant at-large seat. So our hope is to then go out and start recruitment to fill those vacancies using these criteria once we have once the bylaws are amended, which would happen at the next board meeting in July, with your concurrence and any amendments, that you would want to see.
Thank you very much. With that, is there anyone online that would like to comment on this item? Okay, thank you very much. So taking it back to the committee, is there anyone who wants to speak on this item? But before, I want to say, first of all, that having been on the CAC for a very long time, that this interest in focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a topic of long-term discussion. I think there's only maybe one other person on the board, 2, who have been working on this through the entire, so it predates the current administration and pre-COVID. So it is good to see it come to fruition after so much work. And I really want to thank the staff, the fellow CAC members, and the board for taking it seriously. So those are just my thank you comments. And with that,
Thank you. So I wanted to second that, and really thanks for the great work on this. This is excellent, really inspiring. I'm really excited to get some new colleagues here from different walks of life who interact with the transit system in different ways. I think the one just kind of minor wording suggestion that I have if folks are amenable is reducing. I guess I'm someone just, at least in my eyes, like I'm not a huge fan of the word transit dependent, just because I feel like it's something where if it's because it assumes that no matter how bad, no matter what issues transit service has or how bad it is, there are people who will still use it, when in reality, yes, of course it's some people use it more frequently or have more limited access to other choices than others. Everyone is going to be trying to get away from a service if it reaches a certain, if the problems start arising, and it becomes very difficult to get where you need to go using it. So my suggestion is just be, of course, I'd say just using, of course, I'd say in that second usage, like number 11, maybe just saying advocate on behalf of low income populations, because I imagine that's probably what it's getting at anyways. And then that first instance is like number 3 there. That could just be it's something to think about just in terms of the wording there.
Great. Other comments?
Take a turn. In looking through the list, I go, there's like 5 or 6 of these that I represented, or certainly when Nathan was on, he represented people with disabilities, and he had actually applied to be on the Intertrans Advisory Committee, and Lucas said, well, we need somebody like you. So we teamed up from 2017 to 2020. But I also had some experience with people that are homeless and that ride buses, qualify for being a senior citizen. Actually, students enrolled in college and high school, that's interesting. And maybe somebody from UC Davis and the Institute of Transportation Studies, like Autumn and Molly connections. But I think it's wonderful to expand the horizon and look at new folks and see who might be recruited and ready to join.
Other comments?
I'll just echo everyone's thanks. This is great. Excited to move ahead. I guess I'm wondering, when you promote it, I guess just making clear how do we decide ties, or how are we going to determine whether candidates qualify, right? Theoretically, almost everyone that would apply would have a valid, assuming, some outliers would have a valid reason to participate. So how will we decide? How will we weigh one of these against the other? Is it about balance with our existing group, or Is it about some other criteria? So, or are these in some kind of priority order?
It's a great question. They're not in priority order. I think, and then I think that we're looking for the kind of committee as a whole to have balanced representation. So we're not looking to say like, one seat is reserved for someone who's transit dependent and one seat is reserved for someone who's disabled or something like that. I think we're really looking for that. This overall is, this is the kind of the balance of criteria that, we'd like to see represented. And just to reiterate, this is not about changing the existing and people who are currently on. This is about the fact that we do have vacancies to fill. We have current vacancies that have never been filled, and then at some point there's probably going to be some natural turnover as well, right? And so this is about having that clarity going forward for how we want to be deliberate about filling those seats. So, and just a reminder, in terms of the bylaws process, it is ultimately the board has to vote on all of these. And so, but I think you raise a good question, Molly, that I haven't really thought much about in terms of what role the CAC itself would like to play in vetting candidates. And one thing we could think about is whether or not, for example, maybe members of the CAC would want to serve like on an interview panel. For example, if we had interested candidates fill out an application, then maybe CAC members could interview them along with staff and then make recommendations to the board. I don't think that's really spelled out in the bylaws. And that's something that we could consider actually putting into the bylaws or just kind of informally having, a practice that we establish and could refine over time for that process.
That's right. That's right. In the keeping of like process equity, right? There's this whole, field right now, I'm learning about, I don't know a lot, but process equity is.
And I would also just add, sorry, that I think the at-large seats are a little different than the kind of board-appointed seats, right? In terms of, it makes sense that for at-large that there would be, ultimately the board still has to decide, but I think historically it's been that for each individual jurisdiction, it's really that board member who is selecting the person, right? Although you guys correct me if I'm wrong, because you went through this process and I wasn't here. That's correct. Patrick.
Yeah, of course, thank you for the work on this. I think it looks really good. I'm glad that we're focusing on this and making an effort. I would agree with the notion of if we're going to be reflective of the community or ridership, having like a model of like what the community or ridership kind of looks like. I guess if we're being, sticking on the language, I don't know if it makes the most sense in my mind, but and then I have a question about the numbers. If I was adding it up really quickly correctly, is that bring us to a total of 10 seats on this? If we have 6 now and we're gonna add 4 more at large.
Running 3.
We're adding 3.
Running 3 or is it 4? Did I get that
Well, you
wrong?
have 1 at-large vacant, and I think you're adding 3,
So
correct?
then we're adding 4 total, so it is 10.
Okay, so we're gonna want to consider an odd amount
Right.
tiebreaker.
That's a good point.
And then I love the idea of having input into the selection process, but also I would love the opportunity to help promote, or if we could help promote these seats, because I've been trying to think of the best way to kind of get the word out about the work that we're doing here and be a better representative of West Sacramento without really a whole lot of like input avenues right now, other than my Facebook community group that I don't love going on, but I think, something that was talked about at the last meeting and has been talked about before is like, it would be really hard to get here if I were using transit or if I didn't have a vehicle. So I know that there has been some, opportunities for the CAC members to get here, like using Yolo transit. And so I would think that would be for like a good example of something that's really important to advertise, or the stipends, because I think the cost of being here is definitely prohibitive with the voices we really want represented on this. So just going into promoting this, I think we should be very deliberate.
So I have some sort of practical comments, kind of building on that, what others have said, and my own thoughts. So I do a lot of work around boards and equity, and one of the things I do find that's super helpful is to actually survey who's on your board already, and have them report on categories that they meet. And one category is, so for example, I have been homeless, even though you're not now, just to see where people fit. Because then not only can you sort of match it to ridership, but you can see where you lack representation. So that when you're thinking about going through the process, you can sort of keep that at top of mind to make sure you're getting good representation. Because I can pretty much name a bunch of groups that most of these folks are part of that would meet that criteria, but also some that we don't. So I think that's super helpful. When you do the application, it'd be great if it was done as well online, so that you can go out to some of those community-based organizations. And so, for example, I know, at least when I was with the Housing Authority, we had an entire partner section with links. So folks wanted to serve, they could literally click a link on another website and get taken to your application, for example. So you could form some partnerships like that would help you make the list from folks that might already be interested. And I just want to, I saw disability and I saw LGBTQIA, and I just want to be sure that when we're talking about both of those groups, they are very varied communities. And so I know my son fits in both of those communities, so I know that there are lots and lots of folks, and just being sure that we're mindful that that comes in a lot of different ways for both of those. And those are my big ones. Anybody else I missed who I had a follow-up?
I have just a comment. Would it be possible for somebody that has disabilities to provide the Yolo special or your riding to get here and back?
I don't see why not. I mean, because I think what are our hours of operation for paratransit? I'm trying to remember, but I'm sure we can work something out.
It's been done in the past.
Has it? Oh, okay, well then yes.
Oh, chair's prerogative, I also forgot, process. I definitely think that you do need a process. I think it should be iterative and not formal till you get to something that works. It would be great, going back to the work that the CAC did to make recommendations to the board on better connection, that would be a great place to either have an ad hoc group of folks that would look at applications and interview, or have some participation in some way that involves the CAC and the board. Okay. That was my last comment. Any comments that we missed?
I love this comment about the location of our meetings. I mean, is it like a radical suggestion that we consider alternative locations that would be more transit accessible? I mean, is there, any room at the library or something else that like would be, especially considering the movement of that within transit center? I don't know, just throw that there for the thought for the future.
Certainly, no, we're certainly open to it. The 42 does stop right there.
Yeah.
For intercity travel, it's, but there's plenty of there's other places where the 42 stops as well. So
That's true, yeah.
especially once we move it downtown.
I think with the ending of Zoom meetings, that equity question is being asked all over the county. That really broadened people's depth and reach. And I see that we're losing some of that in some of my other boards as well, where that's not an available option. Patrick?
Just to tack on to that I think is a great suggestion of exploring different spaces. Could we also explore rotating meetings? Since this is a county-wide agency.
Winters every month.
I have a related comment to another county agency I'm on. Would the committee be open to sharing not just emails, but phone numbers to facilitate carpooling, kind of like you ad hoc asked for Olin, if we wanted to carpool sometime from Davis? And being conscious of the Brown Act and all, but
I think that before I did that, I'd want some legal advice from the agency's counsel.
I will, yes, we can certainly get that. I think that as long as you're just talking about carpooling, I don't think there's any issues with, with that. So, but you would just have to be very, very mindful of not discussing agenda items, if there was more than 2 of you.
There are carpool apps. We use one for like a big conference. They're pretty cool. It was like, you can create a car or join one.
Have something to explore, multimodal agency.
Something to consider.
So far what I see is that people are pretty happy with the item except for one potential minor word change. And I am wondering if the person who wants to make the word change would want to make the motion.
Yes, I'll make the motion to express the CAC's support of these new bylaws with the one suggested revision that we remove the term transit dependent and use other terminology to get at the intent of those proposed bylaws.
Okay, so do you want staff to take a swing at what that other terminology is, or does the committee want to suggest it?
Can I actually ask a question? Would it be okay if you left it in number 3 and removed it from number 11? It's kind of redundant in 11 anyway.
Yeah, I think definitely, yeah, I think 11 would just be individuals who work with or advocate on behalf of low-income populations would be perfect.
I mean, I will say from my perspective, transit dependent and low income are not the same thing.
Right, which is why transit dependent is actually mentioned in number 3.
Right, in the one case it's individuals, in the other case it's people who work with transit dependent populations. So that could include people who work with low income populations, it could include those who work with youth, it could include those who work with seniors, those who work with disabled populations. So just wanna make that point. If we take it away from 11, then there's implications to that.
What does the motionist want to do?
I think, so I'd say leave, I'd go, it probably is easiest just to have staff work with the language, because it's tricky to do like a track changes kind of thing here, but I'd say just just use term, we express support for the bylaws with the one suggestion that staff seek wording other than or alternative wording to transit dependent to get at the current intent of those bylaws.
Works for me.
Do I have a second?
A second.
Okay, discussion. Over.
Well, Madam Chair, what about the suggestion that was made that it be changed to a odd number? That makes a lot of sense to me, either 9 or 11.
Well, it does open the question is, did they mean 3 new or did they mean to fill the vacant +2 for 3 total at large? And I would definitely think that would be our recommendation. Am I correct?
I wish I could remember, I can't say with confidence. Off the top of my head, but the recommendation would be that it would be an odd number.
Yes, preferably 9. Once you get to 11, it gets tough to fill, let alone to host a meeting.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds like a good amendment to the motion. Good friendly.
I mean, and I came in late here. I'm sorry, everybody.
But are you offering that as an amendment to the motion?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're in discussion.
Okay. So I guess I have a question. For other transit agencies of our size, how big are their citizens advisory committees?
I don't know.
How about RT, some of the big ones?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I'm just wondering why we're increasing the number. Why not just replace us with people who meet these broader criteria?
I mean, I would direct that question back to you, because these were your recommendations to the board.
Right. I think we felt that the cities have their unique things that they need to be represented and they're appointed by the folks. And then we have not enough diversity to meet other requirements as well for sort of overarching populations.
And if I could add, I think that we talked about we talked about adding more, so we have overlap to create continuity. So like, before they replace us, we need to spend some time working together with our would-be replacements, as to not lose the work and the institutional knowledge we create by sitting on this committee. So additional West SAC, for example, representatives would be good because we're starting to work together a little bit before I term out. I think was part of the reason we wanted to add folks here, in addition to the more representation.
And I'll also add that the Unitrans Advisory Committee, which is probably the nearest example here, that's 9 people. So it's 3, and that's kind of a unique structure because it's like 3 that are appointed by students who are appointed by ASUCD, 3 appointed by the Davis City Council, and then 3 that come from other Davis commissions, like one's from bicycling transportation and street safety, 1 from senior citizens, and then 1 from natural resources commissions. I mean, that's their way of trying to getting some of these people from different perspectives and walks of life.
And how does it work out for Unitrans?
I mean, I think it would. I mean, I could go into I could go into the politics and some of what I think. I think one challenge with, if I think I'll go into it a little bit, just I think one challenge is that because Davis has the BTSSC also, and one thing I know, when I was on the UAC, I'd say one frustration would just have that it had a relative to here when we talk, when we have conversations of a broad array of transportation, like fixed route to microtransit to managed lane projects to bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure to transit centers, and we cover all of these things because they're so interconnected. There, I mean, it's very narrowly focused on the Unitrans service and their schedules, and there's resistance from staff when folks want to talk about bus stops and things like that. So that was, but I don't know if that comes down to as much the structure of the committee as just the city's approach, just the city's charge, the broader purview that the city's established for it.
Just going back to total numbers, you have 6 right now with 1 at large. You've never filled the other at large, so I think that CAC's intent was the 6 + 3 for 9.
Okay. I'll go back and scour the minutes and, and if we need to bring that to the board at the next meeting as part of the bylaws change, we will, but you're probably right that, it's probably just not accurate here.
It's just semantics.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Wait, so Molly and then Owen.
so my question is on term limits. We should be kicked off eventually, right? I mean, I appreciate institutional memory, but is there an interest in trying to perpetuate term limits?
I mean, we do have term limits.
We do have term limits, but
We do. Are they enforced? I don't think
I don't
so.
think so, yeah. I know that wasn't, Ellen, wasn't he on the committee at some point and it turned out? Was he?
Not that I
Not that I'm aware of, and maybe that's better for another day. So
Okay.
maybe just a information report at a future meeting on what the terms and limits, if any, are. I do know some folks,
I could send out the bylaws after the meeting, the existing ones.
that would be great. I think some people have turned out of one and been reappointed to another office, so they're more than one bite at the apple as well. Olin, you're next.
Okay, so there are term limits, you said. Well, I know there are terms, but then you can be reappointed, as I understand it.
So we'll just,
But I didn't know there were term limits whereby after you'd served 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever number of terms you were on,
be right.
that you're
I think we'll
off
just, we'll
automatically.
get the bylaws and we'll take a look, and if we want to agendize something in the future, we can do that. If we could focus on the item on the floor, do we have any other potential amendments to it? None? You want to reiterate what you think we're voting on? And whether or not Mr. Streeter would like to take that friendly amendment?
Yes, so yeah, I accept the friendly amendment. So the motion is to express our support for the proposed CAC bylaws with one recommended wording change to use for staff to seek alternative wording to transit dependent to get it the intent of bylaws 3, the intent of bylaws 3 and 11, and then also to recommend that that it be ensured that the number of seats on the CAC be an odd number, not 9, yes.
And I'll second that revised motion.
My only thing would be just to ask staff, to survey existing members later on to be sure that we know what kind of representation we already have.
Is that an amendment to the motion or just a kind of a follow-up item?
I will hound you. And Autumn knows that I can do that.
Noted, that is a Lisa Baker hound.
And with that, I believe we have a motion and a second. Does anyone want to call the question?
Call the question.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I,
Those opposed? Abstentions? Madam Director, you have some bylaws.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And I believe that is it. I do want to hound at one moment right now, which is, I think, at the last meeting that I was at, which is not the last one, I did ask for us to add a section after the final item so that there could be closing comments from commissioners and staff or members and staff.
Heather, looking at you. Let's make that change to the agenda.
It's just, it's hard to like, okay, we don't get to say goodbye or anything, you're all done. So
Closing remarks.
we're all done now. No closing remarks. It is not agendized.
Can I ask you a quick question? I mean, I know the gavel's hit, but it does say that adjournment's an action item. Do we have to?
Do you want to vote?
No, I'm just curious about the proper process.
The chair could, yeah, so maybe we just need to change the agenda. Whatever, in the future.
I like if it's an informational item, the meeting is ending.
Yeah, usually the chair just ends it.
Okay.
I've never seen it.
Maybe we should list it as an action item. Yeah.
I have that, that's what I'm getting to.
I've seen it done, but I don't